Welcome back to the 28th episode of the Elite Performance Podcast. Today, our guests are Zach Dechant of TCU and Dr. Stephen Osterer of Baseball Development Group. Before we introduce our guest, I want their listeners to be aware of our 4th annual Elite Performance Clinic on Saturday, April 14th, that we are hosting at our facility, Building Better Athletes. We are bringing in a great lineup of practitioners, coaches, and lecturers to share hands-on practical information for coaches in the world of strength conditioning and personal training. This is a wonderful opportunity for coaches to get to network and meet coaches in a close-knit environment and have great discussion points at our clinic. This is the 4th year we're putting it on, and every year it gets better and better. We get great feedback from coaches on, what a great opportunity it is to learn from coaches and practitioners in a really personal level. So we hope to see you guys there on Saturday, April 14th. Today we brought in 2 baseball guests to discuss all things strength conditioning and physical preparation for baseball. We got Zach Dechant of Texas Christian University, where he works with the baseball team and also works with the football team with the quarterbacks and receivers. We also brought in Dr. Stephen Osterer of the Baseball Development Group in Canada, and he's a chiropractor and also a strength conditioning coach. So he has his hands in both kind of the medical and the physical preparation world. This was an awesome, just a great podcast today, great discussion by these two. We talked from all things of developing what they do with their developmental athletes, their younger athletes, through their more experienced or higher classification of athletes. We talked about why they perform certain lifts and maybe not other lifts. We talked about how they handle pitchers versus positional players, how they handle warm-ups, between innings, post-games, everything you think of, we talked about in terms of preparation for baseball athletes. So really just a wonderful episode. We did have some audio issues throughout the podcast in terms of our connection and having some breakups. So I did my best to try to piece together some of those things. But hang with us. The second half audio was a lot better than the first half. So just keep hanging in there during this episode, because you don't want to miss the information that these two shared. So without further ado, let's get to Zach and Stephen in this episode. To the Elite Performance Podcast. Today we have a special baseball roundtable with Zach Dechant and Dr. Stephen Osterer. How you guys doing today?
Good. I appreciate you having us.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me on.
Perfect. Zach, let's start with you guys. Give us a little brief background of just where you're at and how you got there.
I am the coach for baseball here at TCU. I've been here for 11 seasons, 10 years actually, 11 seasons. Before that was with the Anaheim Angels for 2 years. Played college football, was kind of an all-around athlete. Ended up going to the Angels, and that's kind of how my path sidetracked, and I got into baseball. TCU has a unique opportunity in that it's a football a position as well as a baseball position. I work with quarterbacks and the wide receivers as well here, so I had been in both, and it was a match made in heaven, I guess.
Stephen?
Yeah, so I'm a chiropractor and strength conditioning coach up in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And, I guess my path started as a pitcher at Cornell University. And, I struggled with injuries a little bit in the past. And, that kind of shaped and influenced where I wanted to go, which led me to chiropractic school up in Canada. And, while I was there, I started training some baseball guys. And, as I graduated through, I really wanted to open up my own place to kind of have everything integrated, the strength conditioning, therapy, the skill acquisition stuff. So, me and my business partner, John Mariotti, just opened up our facility actually this winter, which is pretty exciting. So we got our own space, and we just have everything in-house, which is fantastic.
Oh, the joys of opening up the new facility, huh?
Yeah, it's it's been an enduring process getting everything going, but a lot of fun nonetheless.
Yeah, I remember those early mornings, late nights, not much sleep.
Absolutely.
Perfect. You guys work with a pretty unique population in baseball. let's start with what you guys' assessment looks like. What are you trying to uncover during this time, and how will it affect kind of your training prescription?
Yeah, go ahead, Steve. I'll let you start.
Yeah, sure. So, I guess the first thing for us is always going to be a lengthy conversation. As soon as we get a guy in, we want to know as much as we possibly can about, what they've been exposed to in the past, what's working, what's not working. As a therapist, I want to know if they've had any issues or any major injuries. And, a lot of it really for me comes down to, what's driving them, what are their motivations, and why are they with us? So, we're a private training facility, and a lot of the people that we train, part of the pros, have their own teams and they have their own options for training. So, for me, it's pretty important to understand why they're with us and what exactly they're looking for, and then get a better indication of, how we're going to move forward from at least a logistics standpoint. It starts with that, and then from there I do my on-table assessment to kind of piece together what they have from a movement capacity standpoint. What are their arthrokinematics like? How much range do they have passively, actively? And then transition that into a bit of a movement screen. So, that really gives me a better idea of how they integrate these joints through varying levels of difficulty for movement. And then, from there, it's a technical assessment that I don't do. What's their throw mechanics like, their hitting mechanics like, their sprinting mechanics I do a little bit of. And then from the strength conditioning perspective, that really depends on the athletes. So, we have kids from 14 up to the pros. So depending where they are in their spectrum, will be a little bit more advanced to being as simple as someone punch, right? So. The big thing from my perspective always is going to be that on-table assessment, and that really drives home, at least at the beginnings of when we get these guys, what we're going to focus on. So,
Perfect.
Yeah.
Zach?
Yeah, that was really good. I mean, we do something similar. Obviously, my background isn't in the PT side as much as it is with Dr. Osterer. But the biggest thing for us with that assessment is an open line of communication. And, whether you're using, the FMS or any number of different assessments, for us, it is that it's opening that line of communication with our athletes so that we can find out past problems, current issues that they really haven't told us about. We use the FMS. I have a group of interns. The reason we use the FMS, good or bad, is that we want something that's consistent, reliable, that I can teach quickly to interns that can help us. When you're talking about huge groups of athletes, we've got 40 guys that will screen, 40 to 45 guys will screen in the fall. I've got another group of pro guys that come and work out in the winter with us. That's 25 to 30 guys. And I'm a one-man show, so I need something that interns can kind of pick up and assist me with that can be consistent and reliable. Based on what we see in that screen, that FMS, we move to the table, we do breakout assessments. So we always, 6 times a year, we're always looking at internal, external rotation at the shoulder. We look at the hip extension. We're looking at the Thomas test. We look at the ankle really quite a bit. Thoracic rotation. There's basically 18 different routes that we can take with our athletes once we kind of go through that entry-level assessment. And then we've also got things that we've started using here in the last year with our sports science department. Force plate data that we're taking. We also have PTs that'll come over and help us in some other avenues with we've done a Y balance test. They will measure their own set of variables on the table with flexion, extension, abduction. They'll even do their own internal, external rotation of the hip, flexed and extended. So we try to cover all our bases, but again, it's got to be quick and efficient for us. And the most important thing, like I said, is that open line of communication. So many athletes, we assess every day that they move, just like anybody else. We assess every day that they move, that they warm up. It's an assessment, right? But what you don't get during that time is stuff that's happened in the past. You ask a kid, how do you feel? How do you feel today? Or you had any injuries in the past? A new kid that comes into our program is not going to say, oh, this is achy, or I've had problems here or there. They're going to say, Coach, I feel great. I'm ready to go, because they want to impress. They want to make the team. They want to do their best. They want to show off for the day. So they're not going to tell you a lot of those things when you first meet them. So it's an open line of communication for us.
Perfect. Now, let's say you guys see some sort of red flag pop up, or maybe a past injury in their history, whether it be a UCL or labrum or biceps tendon or something like that. How does that affect you guys' training prescription, or your communication with the ATs or with your other strength conditioning coaches?
So I mean, for me, part of the assessment process obviously is gonna tease out some of those things, but because I have the ability to do the on-table assessment and do the orthopedic examination, as well as prescribe some of the training and the rehab, I get a pretty good indication right away what's going on for, what those past injuries may be, as on the table or on a movement screen, right? So, in terms of how it influences it, I have a little bit more leniency just because I work in small groups and it's private. So I can go one-on-one or two-on-one with guys who are linked with similar issues, right? So, if someone pops up with a previous history of a major injury, it's teasing out, kind of why that happened from a workload perspective. And, if that's the case, then maybe something will show up. But if it's from a movement perspective, or a joint control perspective, or something along those lines, then I'll group the guys together and we'll spend more time restoring active motion or controllable range of motion, and spend a little more time actually putting progressive tissue loading into their program for that area. So it's a nice luxury that I have, but if you're not if you're not in the private sector, it's a little bit tougher. So I can imagine what Zach has to go through with that. It's a little bit more difficult, right? So
yeah, so on our end, I mean, we try to individualize as much as possible. Obviously, the most important thing for us is teaching our foundation movements first and foremost. But if we find something in that screen that's going to limit our ability to teach one of those foundation movements, a basic squat pattern, which we find a lot. We have a lot of issues with hips and hip labrums. So if we find something like that, a lot of times we'll refer out. We have a huge network here, an excellent network that I have help with as far as our PTs go, as far as our docs go. If we find issues, we can do we've done an X-ray before on some of our athletes' hips to see if we actually have limitations soft tissue wise, if there's anatomical limitations. And we found that some of our athletes just aren't built to squat, obviously. Instead of trying to fit that round peg into a square hole, now we realize all we're going to be doing is causing problems. So we can individualize that way. Another way that we do it is, building individual programs on our low intensity days. So we run a high-low program. If you're familiar with Charlie Francis at all, our low intensity days are all built around the individual. So based on what that screen tells us, any red flags, any imbalances, weaknesses, we build the program around the athlete for that day. On the Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, our high days, they're a little bit more team-based, but we try to break down some of the bigger movements based on the individual again. But those low-intensity days are really the bread and butter of our individualization. And if we need any corrective exercises, if we need, mobility work, capsule work somewhere on a hip or a shoulder, those are really the bread and butter for us, I guess.
Zach, I was interested to hear from a college coaches. Do you have the whole baseball team at a singular time, or how are you guys breaking those groups up? You said you have about 40 athletes. Are they all in at a single time, or are you breaking them up by position or by grades, or how are you guys doing that? So
in the fall, yes, we bring them all in at the same time. In the spring, we break them up into groups so that you allow a little bit more, I guess, in a way, individualization, but you allow them to sleep a little bit more. Based on our schedule, our kids have to train a little bit earlier in the morning, so a lot of our groups start at 7 to 7:30 in the morning. In the fall, we have different groups based on training age. So we've got a developmental group, so that's our incoming kids. Freshmen and JUCO transfers. They're in our developmental program, our foundation program, learning movements first and foremost. We've got our older kids that are broken down by pitcher and position. Once we get to the in-season, we actually break that down a little bit more. So we have a Tier 1 group, which is our starters for position side. Our starters, our Tier 2 group are our bench contributors. So a guy that's, contributing in there on the weekend to defensive spot play, pinch running, pinch hitting, that type of athlete. But he's not an everyday starter. We've got our tier 3 guys, which is our developmental groups. So you're talking about freshmen, red shirts, that type that's not playing. And then our pitchers in season are broken down, individually by each start. What day they're starting on is they get an individual rotation, obviously. And then our relievers are a 3-time-a-week program. Consistency is the biggest thing for those guys. But yes, we train as a group in the fall. We like those group dynamics. We want to train as a team. We want everybody seeing. Everybody else. We want the leaders to know who's going to slack off, who's going to be a kid that's going to step up, when they're challenged. We want that team aspect in the fall. In the spring, like I said, we can break it down a little bit more and individualize it somewhat.
Perfect. Now, talking about, pitching, do you guys take any special considerations when working with pitchers in comparison to positional players? Is there anything that you guys do differently or try to take into account for in the weight room or during the movement training comparison to pitchers to position players?
Well, it's a bit of an interesting question. I think the assessment process is always gonna really figure out. It's gonna help us figure out what we want to do with each player, right? So, from a movement perspective, the demands of throwing and hitting are fairly similar. The biggest difference I think between pitchers and hitters, obviously, is how far they actually have to move. So, and how long they have to do that for. So, whereas our hitters and pitchers, we're both gonna, put them both through that movement assessment. We're gonna tease out, how do they rotate, where do they rotate, how well they're actually moving through their shoulder. The big difference I think that we take between these two guys is how much focus we're gonna put on towards getting quicker, faster. A pitcher rarely has to move more than 60 feet with covering a bag or backing up home, right? So that's probably the biggest differentiator, at least from where our general focus is. As we get towards the season and through the season, a big focus for pitchers, relative to the hitters, is actually how much controllable range of motion are they maintaining? What are they losing? Try to intervene there. So, whereas hitters, they have to throw a baseball and they have to go through the extreme demand or movement demands of throwing a baseball and rotation with swing. Pitchers have to do it a heck of a lot more, bigger, and for us, it's staying on top of that range of motion, right? So. We put a lot more focus into that with the pitchers and with the hitters as we get closer to the season and through the season, just because the demands are going to be higher. And then in the off season, it's the second is our focus on and accelerating actually.
Yeah, so I would echo those same thoughts. Rotation is rotation. What those guys do is very similar, to be honest, when you really break it. A lot of the differences for us happen, like Dr. Osterer said, we do a lot of speed work here with our pitchers included. That's where some of the variance will happen is based on what pitchers do and what position players do. There's difference, hopping off the mound 5 yards to grab a ball, having to decelerate, control your body is a little bit different than what a fielder does. Sprinting to a ball in the hole or trying to beat out a double. Outfielders, longer runs, things like that. So we break it down a little bit more specific when we get into our speed program and our movement work out there. Deceleration, pitchers focus highly on deceleration, controlling their body, that feet don't come out from under them when they're fielding a bunt. Once we get into the weight room, the strength aspect, we believe speed, power, strength dominates. So pitchers train that way, position players train that way. Lower body-wise, there are some variances, but remember, everything in the weight room is very general. And again, it depends on the level of athlete we're working on. Every question, that we answer really could be a depends here. My high school athletes train very much the same way. We're just trying to build strength and movement profiles with them. My college athletes, it depends on where they're at in that spectrum, because you could have an athlete that is very, very untrained, and I could also have a top 10 draft pick in that same group. So it depends on that as well. And then when you get to my pro guys, we actually split it up a lot more. It's a lot more individualized, and there is a lot more variance going on between those groups. Within the training of the weight room itself, the biggest difference for us is like Dr. Osterer said, range of motion, number one, making sure our pitchers maintain that range of motion, whether it's hips, shoulders, and then it's upper body for us. Our position guys, they'll do some bench press. We have neutral grip, bench press or football bars, I should say, neutral grip football bars. So they will bench press with that. I actually don't bench press our pitchers for the on the college side. I don't bench press them. We don't do dumbbell bench press. Everything we do is push-up based. So the biggest difference in our guys in the weight room is just upper body stuff. A lot more focus on the serratus, lower trap with those pitchers. A lot more. I shouldn't say a lot more, but it's a lot less of pressing work on the pitcher side. Position guys, we still do a little bit of bench press. I'm always cognizant of the shoulder and being smart with that on the position side too. But those are kind of the differences for us.
So, Zach, what led you to? Have you always been no bench or straight bar or Swiss bar, and only push-ups for your pitchers, or what led you to that process?
Well, yeah, I used to have guys that would do dumbbell bench press. We actually barbell bench press some of our pro guys. I allow those guys to dumbbell or barbell bench press because when they get to their teams, they're going to do it. So we want them to do it here as well. We've had issues, and again, it comes back to the screen. And some of our kids don't need to be doing it. They don't have scapular control. They roll into anterior tilt when they press. We've seen problems, I've had my advanced guys used to do that. They used to do dumbbell bench press. We do some floor press variations. I even let them, barbell bench press in the off season some. But we did start noticing a trend with some of those older guys that they started getting some anterior shoulder irritation. As soon as we pulled them off of that dumbbell bench press at the time and started obviously working more scapular control, it immediately went away. We train the push-up from day one with our younger athletes, so the high school kids I train in camps and things like that. Push-up with those younger athletes. I just think there's so many more benefits to the push-up than there is any pressing exercise, especially with our pitchers.
Perfect. Steven, anything to add to that on your end?
I definitely agree with Zach. It's one of those things where, you're trying to isolate specific tissue, or are you trying to integrate a pattern? So for us, we do a little bit of benching with our younger guys, kind of phase it out as, they develop enough strength to withstand push-up position. But, we have definitely gotten away from any pressing, and we just prefer to actually either load up a push-up. We do a lot of landmine pressing, but the scapular control is absolutely a differentiating factor for us, whether we're gonna dumbbell press or we're actually gonna do a push-up. So definitely agree with what Zach's saying there for sure.
That got me thinking something else, Zach. You guys do. You guys omitted all back squatting. You just guys do front squat, correct, Zach?
Absolutely.
Could you talk about that? Progression, how you got to that point in your coaching career, and then we can talk about the differences between the back squat, front squat, maybe a safety bar squat, etc. But what led you to be in the front squat?
Well, it's what we started out with here. It was our screen. We started finding that in the southern states where we are, it was pars fractures are out of control, stress fractures in the lower back from not only overuse but lack of motor control, lack of core control, pelvic control. Poor movement patterns, poor strength. It's a combination of so many things. These kids down here, it's warm all the time, so they're playing all the time. And we see pars fractures. Honestly, they're out of control, even compared to the UCL. We see pars fractures at a much more higher rate than we see UCLs. To give you an example, our incoming freshman class, one of these incoming freshman classes in the past 2 years, we had 12 athletes, I believe. 6 of the 12 tested positive for a pars fracture. So that's that tells you that we have an issue. The back squat is only exacerbating that problem. We're going into extension. We're creating that problem. We're not solving the problem, I should say. I shouldn't say we're creating it. That's why we eliminated the back squat, was 100% because of the pars fracture episodes that we were seeing with incoming athletes. We eliminated it, I think, I'd say probably 7 years ago. Yeah, 7 years ago or so, and I haven't looked back. I haven't regretted it for one day. I'm so thankful that I finally got out of the mindset that we don't have to be married to an exercise. That there's, just because we're not back squatting doesn't mean we're not, getting stronger, doesn't mean we can't build strength, power, speed, and all the qualities that we want.
Steven, anything to add to that?
No, that's great. That's a great perspective, for sure. I mean, it's going to end up being, for us, we mix in everything. We don't have that same issue with the pars fractures, but we transition from, safety bar to back squat to front to goblet. Or at least I take the perspective that most things are general, especially from loading with the squat position. So, I'm going to expose our guys to a wide range of variations for the squat. But we don't really have a problem back squatting. We don't do a lot of it. If anything, we're going to safety squat and goblet squat a heck of a lot more, do a lot of single leg work. So, I've gotten away a little bit from, the back squat even personally. So, maybe there's a bit of a bias there. But, really for me, it's, what can they handle? How are they handling it? And, we try to vary it pretty frequently in terms of what we're going to expose them to from a squatting perspective. So definitely agree with that, with that mindset. It depends on what you're finding and what your patient base is like and what they can actually tolerate. So, we get a lot of hockey guys who have some awful hips to begin with. So, with a lot of them, we don't even want to go down into an actual parallel squat, and we have to get away from that too. So it just depends on what we see, what we're finding. But for us, it's more of a general perspective on the squatting to begin with. So we kind of vary it up.
Now, have you guys found with your baseball populations, I know with my baseball team, the college team, some athletes, mostly the pitchers, have some aggravation for this front squat. Have you guys found that? And what do you guys do when you come across that situation?
So we use a clean grip with all of our front squats. I like a clean grip because you've got more stability in that position. For us, you've got more stability. The elbows are so important in a front squat. We're creating thoracic extension as well, which, in this day and age, to me, I feel like all of our kids are rounded over all the time, staring at cell phones. They've got forward head posture. Everybody's rounded over a lot of times. So that thoracic extension, I think, is important. We've never really had any problems with I get asked that question all the time with why we front squat like we do, but I've never had an issue elbow, shoulder wise, wrist. If we do have somebody that's had a wrist surgery or something that has a big limitation, which I've only had maybe 2 times in the last 7 years, we use a strap. We'll let them use a strap and, have an adjusted position. But we've really never run into that problem whatsoever. We teach it from day one and we drill it in, 5 days a week in that foundation program that we run with our incoming athletes. We've never had a problem.
Yeah. So for us, we, it kind of depends as well what we see on the table, right? So, do they have the prerequisites in their joints to actually handle that position on the table? And if they do, can they actually get in that position, with just the bar? So, a lot of our guys actually come in and, because they have a hockey background, they'll have some sort of, previous injury or history of wrist issues. And, that's to take away from what we can actually load up in the front squat position. But in general, that, I don't think having a little extra stress in that area is necessarily a bad thing, so long as it's managed properly, right? So if you're in the early off season, they're not doing a lot of throwing or they're not exposing, that area to a lot of stress, then, having a front squat position where you actually put a little bit excess stress into that wrist and elbow, may not necessarily be such a bad thing, right? So I think it's all, context dependent, based off the athlete, where they are in the season, and what they can actually handle. So for us, it's we've had issues with it in the past, but most guys can get coached into it pretty quick, so long as they have the joint prerequisites.
Perfect. Let's go back a little bit to, we were talking about some of the things you guys do for pitchers versus positional players. Is there any differences with you guys, say now in season, in terms of, addressing the warm up and then also post game or post throwing? Are you working that in with the team coaches, their pitching coach? So if you're talking to your athletes, first, let's start with warm up. Are your pitchers doing anything drastically different than your position players?
So for us, we have we do a general dynamic warm up, 13 to 15 minutes with our team, and then our pitchers branch off and they do a specific warm up. So we actually go into some of what their screen showed me, and this is an awesome opportunity. We have about a 10-minute time period where they go into their specific stuff based on what their screen gave us. I give them 2 to 3 exercises. We'll go into some breathing, some rib control exercises, some thoracic rotation if they need a hip rotation. But then they'll branch off and they'll do their own individual program as well. We can also throw a lot of soft tissue in during that time. After that's over, they go into their band circles for even a more specific warm-up of the shoulder girdle, and then it's off to throw. Our position players basically just do the general dynamic warm-up. They get into some speed work, and then they're off to do their base running drills or whatever the case is.
Yeah, so we're very similar to that approach. Obviously, like we talked about, the hitters have a little bit of a different a different emphasis on speed work, and their dynamic movement's going to be about the same. For us, we really harp on controlled articular rotations from the functional range conditioning world, and as we go throughout the off season and we educate the players on how to do them properly, how to use them as an assessment tool, to figure out, do they have any limitations, any stiffness, or something is off on that day. We incorporate that in the warm-up for them to have, a specific plan that they can actually implement. So, let's say a guy's doing cars for his glenohumeral joint and he feels, a little bit of stiffness in forward flexion. He can have the ability, and we've educate the guys on how to actually, tailor the next 5-10 minutes of a warm up to actually get rid of that stiffness or address that issue. And at least from a warm up perspective for pitchers, that has been, like I said before, mobility and joint range of motion and control and accounting for it has been the biggest differentiating factor for us as we get closer and into the season. So we have pitchers spending a great deal of time actually, taking an inventory of every joint in their body and seeing if there are any limitations that are coming up that are, potentially different from what they were yesterday, or if there's pain, which can then further direct a specific intervention immediately afterwards. So, whereas position players, they're not necessarily as likely to succumb to those limitations as rapidly throughout the years. So it is still in there, but it's not going to be as big of a focus for us, at least. That's kind of what we found, and what differentiates us for the warm up. In terms of post game recovery routine, we tend to shut it down pretty much for pitchers right after. We don't do a lot of excess stuff right after they throw. We don't do a lot of band work. We don't do a lot of we do a little bit of static stretching, but we don't do all that much, to be honest. We've gotten away from adding more work after they've thrown. I think pitchers, it's interesting how at least how I view people managing pitchers right now with how much stress they're actually inducing into them and how much they're asking of their tissues, that we've taken a step backwards from how much we actually do. And it's more about the day after, if it's a night game or if it's a day game at night, to, again, go through something as simple as cars to take an inventory on what happened, how our joints are moving and feeling, and then directing an intervention from there.
Zach, so how about you guys? A starter goes 7 strong innings. He comes in the dugout. Is there a routine he's going through, or a reliever, et cetera? What are they doing post-throw in a game or even practice?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, what Dr. Osterer said is right on for us as well. I've never been a fan of the coming out of the game and doing work right after. You know, a kid that might go 7 innings, you can't tell me he's not fatigued. That shoulder is fatigued. Posterior cuff is fatigued from everything that he's done. We wouldn't squat heavy and then come back 15 minutes later and squat some more to recover. So as soon as we're done on the mound, our guys are done for the day. You know, most of our kids will put on the Mark Pro and do some, just some a little bit of flush work with that Mark Pro, which we love. But everything for us happens 24 hours post. So they'll do the same thing that Dr. Oster talked about. They'll come in, we'll gain range of motion back. Take note of what's tight, take note of what's not working. And it's all soft tissue recovery, tons of recovery-based stuff. And then from there, generally what we do is it's about a 30-minute recovery session, gaining range of motion, all our soft tissue stuff, any of the things that we catch on a movement screen. Like I said, we'll touch on some of those things as well. And then they'll go into a little bit of either a lower or upper body workout. That's always post. With our relievers that come out, same thing. On the weekends, our relievers do a recovery session every time they throw the next day, 24 hours. So it's, again, we do some heart rate work in the 120 to 140 zone for 20 minutes or so. We're not a big running program. And then it's all range of motion, regaining range of motion everywhere.
Now, this could be a whole nother podcast probably, but is there anything you guys are doing, heat, ice, compression, same day you throw, post days, or anything you guys doing with that with your ATs or PTs? What do you guys, I know this is a topic of discussion, but what are you guys thoughts, or are you guys do anything on that front?
Personally, we don't really use ice all that often. I know there is, a big negative connotation with ice and adaptation, and we're kind of getting away from that, from icing in general. And, the research is, it's supportive of that, but at the same time, it's also supportive of the perception of recovery, right? And the psychological benefits of reduction in DOMs and how they're feeling. So, on the one hand, we don't ice, but if a guy wants to ice in the middle of the year because, he thinks he really needs it, I don't see there being a huge downside to it. In terms of recovery and recovery protocols, I think there's a significant difference between, the in-season, surviving in-season, especially in professional baseball relative to high school baseball. But, it's a little bit of a different, vantage point and perspective that needs to be had for it. So for our pro guys, it's more about, perceptual recovery and, throw anything that actually makes you feel better to actually survive the season, rather with high school kids where we're still trying to, get adaptation in the season, where we don't want to throw them on 15 different modalities and take away the actual signal for adaptation, right? So for us, we've gotten away from using a lot of EMS units. We use it here and there. We use it in season to survive, is a good way to think about it. But as we get closer to in season, the off season with high school kids, I don't like giving them 15 different things to do for recovery and almost creating a dependency on performance and perfection by using them. So we've gotten away from that a little bit, and we've really gotten into more of a self-efficacy perspective on it. So something like cars or daily movement screen for themselves to get your body moving, but to take inventory about how your body's actually handling load. That's the biggest basis and probably the foundation of what we prescribe for recovery work. Not so much icing or heating or compression. Sleep is obviously the biggest thing, but outside of sleep and nutrition and hydration in certain aspects in Canada doesn't get that warm, so we're not sweating all that much. But outside of those big three, I would say the biggest thing that we actually rely on is a daily movement practice, and keeping an eye on how our joints are handling the load, especially in pitchers where things can go sour pretty quickly.
Yeah, excellent answer. We're kind of the same. You know, it's very much individual based. If a pitcher feels that ice is the answer, you know, we don't have a problem with letting them ice after a game. If they think that that's helping, then have at it. Like I said, a lot of our pitchers, a lot of our starters, I should say, are Mark Pro guys where they'll do a light flush afterwards, you know, getting that pump working. But our entire program is based around movement, making sure we maintain movement in season. You know, what I was thinking of while he was answering his question there was the biggest question we get is what's your cuff program? Well, our entire program is our cuff program. You know, it's the way we organize recovery sessions in between high intensity sessions. It's everything is accounted in that cuff program. You want to if you want to say so. So the entire program is that. It's not just one or two things here to you know, icing or heating or anything. We have access to all those things: cold tubs, hot tubs. They have access to everything that they could ever want, but it's really the entire program.
Perfect. Now, do you guys ever discuss with your pitchers, say the offense is having a big inning, it's, you know, they're scoring a lot of runs, so it's a long inning between their say a starting pitcher, you know, he's in the dugout. Do you guys implement any kind of like 2-out routines, or you know, at least communicating with the pitcher to do something if there's a longer offensive inning before they go back out on the mound? Anything on that front?
With our guys, you know, I actually just saw the video. I think Mike Reinhold posted here a couple weeks ago on their 2-out, whatever they call it, 2-out prep or something like that. Our guys will get up in between innings and go throw. Is basically what they do. We'd never really done a whole lot of the you know, stretch and movement stuff in the dugout necessarily, but they know when an inning gets long, they go up and throw. You know, where we do some of that stuff is with our relievers. So I go down in the pen, usually 5th or 6th inning, and we start doing some dynamic work down there in between innings. Our guys will do a dynamic stretch. They'll do some type of moving warm-up in between each inning so that they're starting to ramp up a little bit as it gets closer for their time.
Yeah, that's a great point. The you know, from a reliever standpoint, that's you know, Zach nailed it. It's important, I think, for them to not only be, you know, physically ready, but to be psychologically ready. So, you know, if their routine to get ready through, you know, that we built off in the off season was whatever it may be, you know, the cars and then a dynamic warm up, and then maybe, you know, addressing something they found, you know, that idea needs to be carried on or carried over into the actual season, where for a reliever to actually do that while they're waiting. Right. So I think getting into a routine, having a routine, and, you know, something to kind of get you psychologically ready as a reliever is very important. And, you know, I think a little bit underutilized, but from a 2-out perspective, you know, kind of, you know, I'm on the fence a little bit in terms of, you know, do we want them to throw or do we want them to just do a little bit of light movement? You know, it's kind of up to individual preference for us. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about what, you know, I think every young pitcher, high school, college, you guys probably see it a ton too, is they want to increase their throwing velocity. And so, you know, talk about are there some specific things you guys are looking at when trying to increase velocity, or have you found things to help enhance throwing velocity, whether it be from a physical standpoint, strength, power, or joint range of motion standpoint, or a mechanical standpoint? You know, what are some things that you guys say recruit for you, Zach, or, you know, a client for you, Stephen, coming in the private sector, that, you know, my goal is to increase throwing velocity? And what are some things that you guys kind of maybe talk to them about, how you guys address that, whether you know, your thoughts or opinions on that?
Well, we pretty much everyone that we get wants to improve velocity. You know, we work with a lot of high school and college kids who are trying to get to that next level. So that is question number one from everyone is, you know, how much velocity can we gain? And, you know, again, when you're dealing with younger athletes, there's a lot of buckets that you can fill for that. And, you know, for us, it's nailing some of the, you know, foundational movements in the gym and make sure that we have the prerequisites to do that. It's getting bigger and stronger, improving, you know, power and you know, all those things. But as you get a little bit more advanced and the training age goes up, it becomes a little bit more reliant on us to try to integrate what we see, from a throwing mechanics standpoint with what we see on the table and controllable range of motion, right? So, my goal, I'm not a pitching coach. I'm not a hitting coach. I pitched in college, but, that's not my focus. My focus is to, physically prepare the athlete to handle whatever they're going to be exposed to in the season. But then also from a skill acquisition standpoint is to provide the pitching coach, an athlete with as many movable or movement options to solve that movement task, right? So, it's one of those things that when we get a guy who's, maybe 2 or 3 years in and his strength numbers are adequate, and the focus now becomes, can we maximize controllable range of motion? What do they have in their hips? What do they have in their trunk for rotation? And how do their arms, or their shoulders at least move? So, for us, the biggest thing that we found is, getting away from this idea that everyone needs to, throw weighted baseballs to gain velocity, and being a little bit more movement focused and getting a lot more strength at end range and controllable range. So, for me, it's making sure that when I get, when we're integrating our strength conditioning and our movement stuff and our skill acquisition stuff, that we're affording the system as many options to solve the motor task and to solve it as efficiently as we can, rather than, grunt through and, try to get bigger, stronger after the guy's already got, a good amount of strength, a good amount of power. It's more so getting a biomechanical change, being more efficient, and just providing that kinetic chain with more options for movement. So for us, that's been the big take-home point with, the more advanced athletes. It's, something as simple as working up to a 10 out of 10 contraction and max external rotation of the glenohumeral joint. It's, improving rotation, like actual segmental rotation in the T-spine. So it's been more of a focus on that than, all you got to do is intense stuff with the weighted balls and gear up to 100% effort, and, get your squat up to 450 pounds instead of 350 pounds. The emphasis for us changes pretty quickly once we've filled a bunch of those buckets. And I think what we do a little bit differently than most programs, at least that we're in contact with in our bubble, is really drive home end range strength of range of motion and just controllable range of motion.
Yeah, I don't even know if I can add anything to that. For us, it's developing the total athlete, the pitchers. It's developing a total athlete within a pitcher. And again, it depends on the level that you're working with. With younger athletes, high school aged athletes, so many of those guys are going to increase velo by learning how to train, learning to move better. Just what Dr. Osterer said. Increasing strength with those guys will increase everything. A rising tide lifts all ships. Strength at that level early on, teenage years, will improve everything. It improves speed, power. It's the foundation of all other motor abilities, in my opinion. With some of our more advanced guys, we get into the, our college and our pro guys. A lot of that, falls back onto our pitching coach. And we work together a lot of times to see what deficiencies we have going on in the mound that we can work on on the performance side. A guy that's fallen off to his left side maybe has a lack of hip IR on the front side, or a lack of ER on the back side, causing him to rotate around. So it's a combination of working with a guy that is his specialty, and then being able to apply it through myself and maybe a physical therapist to say, okay, well, this might be the issue that we're seeing, and let's go back and test it and see if that really is the problem. But, the weighted balls, we actually get into some weighted balls. We'll do some plyo balls with some of our pro guys. And some of my high school guys, my younger guys, that once they're developed and they've got that foundation level of strength, of movement, of power, of speed, we might start doing some patterning. Not all my kids will do that, but we'll start doing some patterning. And it's not necessarily like, like Dr. Oster said, it's not the 100% pull downs all the time. Just teaching an athlete how to move better and more efficiently will go to great ends as far as developing developing velocity on a baseball. And one of my buddies says he's a physical therapist for the Royals. They see the weighted balls as too many kids are doing them too early. It's icing on a cake that hasn't been baked yet, which it really is. Handle nutrition, sleep, learn how to train correctly before you start layering in those advanced, means and methods, in our opinion. Yes, they are excellent. They are excellent for a lot of things, but we want to make sure that we have, the correct movement patterns in place. We want to make sure that we have, power, speed, strength, all of those foundation qualities before we start worrying about some of the more advanced methods, in our opinion.
Perfect. Just a couple kind of last final questions here, just floating in my head. Zach, let's start with you. You talked about you guys work a lot of speed work with your position players and your pitchers. Kind of walk us through some of the goals that you're going through. Baseball, typically you're not really talking about the guys learning how to run correctly, how to accelerate correctly. So, how do you guys approach your speed work or acceleration work with your team?
Right. So, with team sports, technique, we can't hammer it a ton because we don't have a lot of time, especially at the NCAA level. So our primary focus when it comes to technique is arm development, the pattern of the arms. If you create better arm drive in a more efficient pattern, you're going to clear up 90% of the problems the way we see it. So our biggest focus is always on arm drive with our athletes, and that's really as far as it goes. Now we do some A skips and A work in our warm up, things like that, but we don't go to extreme lengths to teach and drive technique. Our biggest goal is 0 to 30 yards, and really our true emphasis is probably even more like 0 to 10 yards with all of our athletes. It's acceleration. Our pitchers, especially like we talked about earlier, it's based around deceleration. So controlling their body into a stop so that they can, field that ball without feet slipping out from under them. It's learning how to control their body and stop. We don't test 60s here. Baseball is known for the 60-yard dash. We have never tested a 60 here. Our gold standard is the off the barrel to first base, down the line to first base. That's what we want a guy to be fast at, beating a ball that's in a hole somewhere. We want him beating that down the line. So our emphasis truly lies in 0 to 30 for our position guys, but really, like I said, 0 to 10 is where our big emphasis is for both pitcher and position.
Now, do you guys place a big emphasis on, is that mostly from like linear start, or are you guys doing it like just stealing a base all over? Yeah, go on.
We do. I mean, it's like Dr. Osterer has been talking about. We want to give them as many movement skills as they can possibly possess. So we start a ton of our runs out of a blind start, what we call a blind start. So laying on their belly. We change the position, laying on their stomach facing forward, laying on their side, laying on their back, head away from the line. We want that body to learn how to accelerate in the most efficient position out of a bunch of variable positions that it's not familiar with. So one of our days will be all blind starts. Another day might be all what we call 3 and 4 point starts. So down on a knee in a 4 point, head facing forward, in a 4 point start, head facing backward to the side. Any position, we'll use it. And then we go to our 2 point starts on another day. So we're facing, athletic position facing forward, which is really our most specific to the game of baseball. And as we get closer to the season, we put those position players in more specific starts. So we've even gone as far to put a pitcher out there, and we'll work on steals. We'll work, off of the motion. We'll work on secondary leads. We'll run bases and things like that as we get closer in season. But yeah, we want to teach them how to accelerate out of a ton of different positions so that they have to, their body gets used to moving in that frame.
Awesome. Now, Stephen, the question I wanted to ask you was, you kind of touched upon, trying to give your athletes maybe this daily little screen that they can put themselves through. Can you kind of talk about what some of those things you might include in that daily screen for them to kind of auto-regulate or just check themselves to see if something's, gunky, if something's feeling well or not so well? What is kind of that daily routine that you kind of talked about that you want to put your athletes through? What are some things you include in that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, one of the biggest things that we try to convey to these, to our clients and our players is, self-efficacy and self-awareness and, empowerment, because, a lot of our guys, especially the high school and college kids, they have to do a lot of work on their own. So for us, part of, the off season and the winter program that we run is to ensure that they can have some of the tools to, address some of the issues that may come up in the season. They don't necessarily always have the opportunity to go and get, soft tissue work, or have an individual focus with, a strength coach as much. So for us, that daily routine is, it's become a staple for our guys to, have, an empowerment over, monitoring what they can actually, or monitoring how they're handling load, really. So that looks like, for most of them, it's CARS to begin with. So controlled articular rotation, FRC land. Where guys will basically go through every joint in their body, and they'll spend 1 or 2 minutes, internally qualifying how that joint feels. When you do it on a consistent basis, a day-to-day basis, you get a pretty good understanding of what range you have, or if there's an acute change. So, at least from my perspective as a therapist, guys will go from, being healthy and feeling great to, being really sore pretty quickly. It happens in a week or two. And, getting guys to actually screen their own joints and have some sort of qualification for how it feels, and maybe not so much quantification because it's hard to actually quantify how your joints are moving, but have some sort of a tool to assess how that joint is responding to what we're asking it to do. On a day-to-day basis, we'll give them at least some sort of preventative measure, for going down the wrong path. So, a lot of our guys, they come up with the same issues, and they have, we give them a routine or some of the tools to actually intervene. So they have to distinguish whether it's, it's just stiffness or soreness. If there's actual a sharp pain, then maybe it's a joint problem that needs to be worked out by someone else. But it gives them at least, some valuable information on their handling, the demands of a season, the demands of even the off season. Intervene it to the point that they can, but to also develop, at least some information to actually give to a coach or to a therapist, right? So often a player will come in and they'll be like, yeah, I'm having pain, on the front part of my shoulder, and that's all they're going to give you, but when one of our athletes starts developing that, they can at least go to a therapist and be like, you know what, in this position of a shoulder rotation, it started to feel tight over the last 2 weeks. And, now it's to the point where instead of it feeling tight, there's a pinching pain on the front. That gives, a heck of a lot more information to a therapist, and gives you a head start to actually getting rid of that pain and addressing it, rather than just showing up and, just saying my shoulder hurts. Right. So, that day-to-day routine is, it's been pretty powerful, but it starts with that screening. And then, depending on what they find, they'll do some light isometrics, depending on the type of pain they find, because that can have an analgesic effect, but it also will help direct tissue healing. And, that's pretty much the two foundations for what we do, from a daily perspective. And, once a week in the off season, we have, recovery and regeneration day, where we can actually, take that and guide them through it, and then also integrate, whatever joint that they're working on with another joint. So they'll start working on their shoulder, with rotation of their thoracic spine, or in conjunction with their scapula. Right. So, that's one of those things that I would highly recommend. Every player that comes through, we recommend it to, but I'd recommend, more people do that, just to give players, get them away from more of a, dopamine dominant training, hard, philosophy that we see very often, to more of an internal perspective, more sensory perspective on how their joints are handling things. So,
just could you walk us through, and you talked about some of the controlled articular rotations, the CARS, for maybe some of those that aren't familiar, but what might that look like? Or you're obviously talking about baseball, so the shoulder, what might some of those CAR movements, you could describe it, what
Right.
What are you talking about for maybe the shoulder?
So basically CARs are taking a joint through a full range of motion, in rotation. So if I'm going to do, carciform glenohumeral joint, I'm going to go in as big of a circle, an arm circle, as I can with rotation. If you're doing it for the hip, it's going to be very similar. So because those are both joints that go in rotation, it's a little bit easier to conceptualize rather than trying to explain, supination and pronation through the elbow. But if you take a joint through a full rotation, especially in the shoulder, you're essentially looking for areas of stiffness. You're looking for areas of stiffness and soreness, or you're looking for like what we call a closing angle pain, which is a sharp pain on the opposite side of the joint that you're actually moving. So if I go overhead and I'm closing off in the flexion, if I feel a pain on the same side of the joint, on the closing side of the joint, that would be a closing angle pain, and that usually is an arthrokinematic problem or joint problem that needs to be addressed with a little bit more specificity than just using a foam roller. Whereas if I'm going into flexion and I feel it on the other side, the opening angle, that's something that players can often intervene with isometrics, or even just static stretching sometimes. But those controlled articular rotations, it's really just trying to isolate one joint at a time, one articulation at a time, to get a better sense of what's going on, whether it's a loss of range, the same amount of range, a lack of fluidity, stiffness, sharp pain, etc.
Great. I really like that. I like that idea of giving people like a daily homework that they can go through, whether at the facility on their own, and kind of like you said, just self-assess themselves. And like you said, gives ownership and empowerment to the athlete to take control of their body and their performance, and not be, like you said, kind of this passive or reliance on a coach to tell me what to do, where to do it, when to do it, because we're not always going to be with them, especially in a private sector. They're going to be gone, after the 3 months they train with you, whatnot, they're gone for their season. So I really like that. That's great stuff.
Yeah. Steven, do you guys do that right when they walk in the facility, or do you do a warm up before that? How do you guys handle that? Like in your, as far as timing goes for your workout?
We do right away. So we encourage our guys, even if they're not, even if they do come in, they're going to do it in the morning so that they can start learning the process and understanding it a little bit more. But we do it right away when they get in. It maybe takes 5-10 minutes max. We skip through certain areas on a day-to-day basis if they're doing it at home too. So primarily, with pitchers and throwers, we really, take notice of something like the glenohumeral joint, the hip joint, and then cat-camel positions. So those are, probably the three big ones that, I'm watching every time they do it, but we try to nail that home with our guys. And, it doesn't take very long. And,
right.
To your point, Michael, it's, those guys, we don't see them all the time, so we can't assess them very often. And they're often reluctant to come in the season to begin with, right? So we need them to take accountability for that as much as they possibly can. And, we've found a pretty good correlation between, acute changes in range of motion and the development of an actual injury. So for us, if we can get that information, before something, acute happens, and then that's great. And, for us, it's really more empowerment for these athletes to understand their body and, take control of their own health.
Zach, are you guys doing anything on you guys' front with whether it be some sort of daily screen or questionnaires for you guys that you guys are getting intake back from the athletes?
So yeah, we've done. We actually made an in-house questionnaire here a few years ago, and we used that pretty extensively. And while it was good, it took a ton of time. It took a ton of time up, to be honest. So we really preach with our guys their own daily assessment, and we adjust and adapt their workout based on how they feel. So we give them 15% drops. So let's say we're working up to 8 down in the to 70% range that they have the option to work in, depending on how their body is. Again, I touched on him. Workload as far as the program goes. Right? They can do changes that they can make within their program based on how the individual feels.
Awesome. We lost you there just a little bit, Zach, but we got the tail end there.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
Oh, no
I
worries.
couldn't tell.
The last part we kind of picked up was you guys picked up the motor sleeve, you said?
Yeah, here, we picked up the motor sleeve. And so that'll allow us in the future to monitor workloads a little bit more with our pitchers. You know, that's not something that we're going to implement right away this year in the middle of the season. There's a few guys that we want to put it on and see what's going on, but that'll allow us in the future to see some different workloads. But what I was saying was, did you catch the percentage brackets that I kind of gave, or did you miss that?
No, we did not, no.
Okay, so within our individual program, within our individual workout, each kid has their, excuse me, each kid has the option to do a heavier or a lighter percentage workload. So our tier 1 guys come in. If they feel great, they have the option to, hit 80 or 85% for the day. If they don't feel great, we've got another lower percentage bracket, which we call our light day, which is 15% drop off from the top percentage. So if we're at 80 or 85%, these kids would be working at 60 to 65 to 70%, a 15% drop off, so that they have the option to go down to that lighter percentage if they don't feel like, if their body's not up to it for the day. So we're always preaching readiness and how your body feels, whether it's on the field throwing, whether it's in the weight room. I touched on it just a second ago. You guys might not have heard it, but volume as well. We have options as far as high volume, medium volume, and low volume go for the day for each one of our kids in season. So if a kid doesn't feel up to it, he takes the low volume, he takes the low intensity. He's in and out and hoping to recover a little bit better. If a kid feels great for the day, he can take the high intensity options. He can take the high volume workload and, get a little bit more out of his workout for the time.
And Zach, how are your coaches, the coaching staff, in terms of perception of using some of this data or technology that you guys have? Are they pretty open to some of the information that it gains? Or, sometimes I know it's a tough spot for coaches in the public sector in terms of taking this information and applying it to the actual sport coaches. Are they open to that and receptive?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very, very fortunate in that we have, weekly staff meetings that we can talk about anything openly. They're open to whatever suggestions I have as far as, what the team looks like, how practices should be going. If we've got problems with pitchers, losing range of motion that we've noticed with our measurements or within the weight room or within movement, they are extremely receptive, like the motor sleeves. We brought that up to them as a way to monitor workload in some of the down periods. Kids are away from campus during Christmas break, things like that. We brought that up to them. They're extremely receptive. We've started using some force plate data. Our pitching coach is all about it. We recently bought the Rapsodo. Baseball is very, very, a lot of coaches in baseball are very tough to change their ways, to adapt to new technologies and things like that. Our staff couldn't be better as far as we want to make the best player that we have at the time. We want to create a better player. So they're open to whatever we want to do.
That's awesome. Yeah. No, after running, you just got to take a 5-mile run to flush the lactic acid out of your arm, right? That's what most.
Right. Yeah. Get the lactic acid out. Sure.
Well, guys, I really appreciate it. Real quick, Steve, I'll start with you. Where can guys find you on social media, or if they want to get in contact, ask you more questions?
Yeah. So you can check out our website, which is baseballdevelopmentgroup.com. Or you can find me on Instagram at Baseball Development Group. On Twitter, I'm a little bit more active, and that's just Dr. Saucer word. Outside of that, if anyone wants to email me and shoot the breeze, I'm always open to that sort of thing. Being in Canada and being a baseball guy, sometimes it can be a little bit lonely. So if anyone wants to, send me an email, steve@baseballdevelopmentgroup.com. I'm more than happy to have conversations.
And Zach?
Yeah, Twitter is the biggest spot for me. It's Zach Dechant is my Twitter, I guess, handle, whatever you want to call it. I do some blog, or I do a little bit of blogging. I write a little bit on my website, zachdechant.com. Sometimes it's tough. I'm not somebody that's posting every day, every week, sometimes every month. Time gets tough when it gets in season, and then I've got hopefully I've got a book here coming out in the next couple months on programming, kind of for small college, high school coach type, high school baseball coaches that have to control their own weight room, so to speak. And it's all about creating movement, learning how to create movement in our big, 5 foundation exercises. It's going to be called movement over maxes for us. We're not a max program. We want guys that move right. The weight or the movement dictates the weight for us. So that's going to be coming out in the next couple months, hopefully, depending on how much time I get during baseball season. But yeah, they can find me at those places. And then, like Steven said, email me anytime with questions. Feel free to, we openly invite coaches to come by, watch workouts. We're all about learning, getting better, and helping coaches build better athletes. The better athletes they build, the better athletes we get. So.
Well, guys, Zach, Steven, I really appreciate it. I took a lot away today, so I just want to thank you guys for your time today and for all that you do for the field and information you share. I know I'm very thankful for what you guys put out.
Join me in thanking today's guest for a wonderful episode. If you guys took something away from this episode, please share it on the social media website of your choice and thank our guests for the wonderful opportunity that we had to learn from them. And as always, we'll see you guys next time on the Elite Performance Podcast.